Jordan Peterson is a culturally explosive Canadian psychologist. His lectures, interviews, and books have millions of sales and millions of views. He has a unique corpus of psychological knowledge ranging from evolutionary psychology, to Bible history, to Nietzschean and Carl Jung philosophy. And despite not explicitly telling his adherents to work out, a lot of them end up actually doing it. It isn't uncommon to see a TikTok compilation of him talking interspersed with clips of people working out.
One of the things I tell young men, well, and young women as well, but the young men really need to hear this more, I think, is that you should be a monster. Everyone says, well, you should be harmless, virtuous. You shouldn't do anyone any harm. You should sheath your competitive instinct. You shouldn't try to win. No. Wrong. You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it.
So for this video, I'm going to go over his 12 rules for life and relate them to working out. Now, there's actually so much in just a chapter or two of his books that I was only able to go through like 3 or 4 for this video. If I were to go through all 12 of his rules, I'd imagine that this video would be like 3 hours, 4 hours long. So I'm going to go over all the things that stood out to me for the first couple chapters, and just in general the things that I thought were especially powerful. Now, on a purely literal level, Peterson is a proponent of evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology posits the idea that it is the fittest who survive. And while Darwin probably didn't necessarily mean cardiovascular endurance or muscular strength, that certainly plays a role in it. I would argue that he probably largely actually meant that. To be fit, by definition, is to have the ability to survive. In the short, brutish, pre-industrial era, having exceptional physical strength and cardiovascular endurance was actually very important. So in a roundabout way, by merely speaking in such terms, Peterson is promoting bodybuilding, or fitness generally speaking. So the takeaway from that point is to be a holistic type of athlete that will give you the best chance of reproduction. Because of course, in evolutionary psychology, the idea is that it is the ones who reproduce that survive. So this means that we should not only be physically strong, but we should also have great cardiovascular endurance. In an interview with Peter Attia, I don't know how to pronounce his name, he talks about how this could be applied to our old age by making sure our joints and muscles work properly. So focus on the type of fitness that will keep your body strong and less prone to decay in older age. This does not mean that you shouldn't do squats and deadlifts and really heavy, hardcore exercises, especially when you're young, because Peterson is also an advocate for pushing your limits and taking risks. Of course, like well-calculated risks, not just like jump off a building just for the risk factor alone. But we'll talk more about that later. So just keep in mind the natural functions of your body and make sure that those are still intact, and work out in such a way that you'll be able to work out for a long time. Peterson's first rule is to stand up straight. This means that you have good posture, literally, and that will help you live longer. I know he was talking metaphorically, but literally it's also still important. Due to Peterson's evolutionary psychology background, he also likes to talk about dominance hierarchies, and this necessitates competition. And one of the ways boys especially like to compete is through sports. Now, I would actually argue that the entire reason sports were created was to give boys an arbitrary reason to compete. And I think men like to compete in very physical ways. Like, you know, there's something fun about actually being tackled and tackling in football, as long as it's not like too hard getting tackled, but like, you know, getting tackled is like, it's kind of fun, I don't know. Jordan Peterson is famous for talking about lobsters, and this is because in the very first chapter of his book, he spends like 10 pages talking about lobster societies. He talks about when lobsters compete and win, their posture becomes better, which makes them more attractive to female lobsters. And I think similarly, exercise actually improves your posture. Not only that, but in bodybuilding specifically, you actually compete against someone. You compete against yourself, and you win, and that will increase your confidence. In sports, you have to actually overcome an opponent, but in bodybuilding, the opponent is yourself. So every time you increase a muscle size, every time you look at yourself and realize you've gotten bigger, that's actually a battle won. And it's a battle that every single one of us can win with no losers. Because in other sports, there are losers required in order for there to be winners. But with bodybuilding, there's always winners. We're all winners. Bodybuilding is a positive feedback loop that is the most durable form of victory, which anyone can attain and no one can take away. In 12 Rules for Life, Jordan Peterson has a relevant quote. He says, "You are important to other people as much as to yourself. You have some vital role to play in the unfolding destiny of the world. You are, therefore, morally obliged to take care of yourself. You should take care of, help, and be good to yourself, the same way you take care of, help, and be good to someone who you loved and valued. You may therefore have to conduct yourself habitually in a manner that allows you some respect for your own being. Perhaps this explains the ostensibly odd correlation between male self-improvement manifesting as fitness and Petersonian philosophy.
The antidote to the meaninglessness of their life and the suffering and the malevolence that they might be displaying because they're resentful and bitter about how things have turned out, the antidote to that is to take on more responsibility for themselves and for other people, and that's aspirational.
As an antidote to nihilism, Peterson posits self-responsibility. We find the meaning of our lives through responsibility. Peterson posits that we should always be pushing uphill no matter what, because no matter how poor your life is, the alternative to virtue is always worse. And this could apply to fitness and bodybuilding. Some people have it genetically worse than others, but the alternative is to stay where you are now, and you've already ascertained that that isn't a favorable position. So keep pace and keep going forward. Peterson also talks about the internal critic, and I think this is very important for people with body dysmorphia. The internal critic makes you doubt the value of your endeavors. There will always be people better than you is the cliche of nihilism. And Peterson somberly acknowledges this. There will always be people better than you. And even beyond that, you may not actually even be remotely good, even competent at everything. In the book, he calls these things games. There are some games that match your talents. Maybe you're better fit to be a lawyer, a plumber, an architect, an author. We may lament to how we cannot be good at all the games, but this is also hubris. He says that winning at everything doesn't mean you're actually doing anything difficult. You may be winning in the literal sense, but you aren't growing. And growth is a form of winning. When you stop improving, you become stagnant. And when you become stagnant, that opens you up to nihilism. So pick up that barbell and lift. For the act itself is progress that you should cherish. The thing about there always being someone better than you is that there's also always someone worse than you. Perhaps you're overvaluing what you don't have and undervaluing what you actually do have. There's some real utility to gratitude. It protects you against the dangers of resentment and victimhood. Find meaning in the journey. Perhaps happiness is always found in the journey uphill. Perhaps happiness isn't actually the fleeting sense of satisfaction we reach on that peak. There's much more to be said about Peterson's philosophy and how it relates to bodybuilding, and perhaps I'll say those one day. I only really went over the first 4 books as well as like some scant interviews here and there where he vaguely talks about it. And even then I truncated a lot of my points to, fit in a video. But I hope this video really does help you. If you want me to talk about those things that I didn't talk about, let me know in the comments and make sure this video gets, significant number of views. That way I can actually justify it to myself. So share it with your friends and share it on various social media platforms so that it gets some traction. If you enjoyed this video, you would probably also enjoy my video on stoicism and bodybuilding. It's in a sort of similar theme. And with that, I'll thank you guys all for watching. See you all next time. All right, peace.